Hi, good morning all. Sunil Joseph here on behalf of Edureka. So we are going to talk about servlets and JSP, a Java subject. So what is the agenda for today's session? So the agenda for today's session is we talk about introduction to web. So everyone knows about what is web, or we talk about internet. So internet is nothing but international network. So answer to your query, JSP is nothing but Java server pages. JSP Java server pages. So the agenda, so many things are there. So what is internet? So internet, I'll split that word into two. So international plus network. Inter is nothing but international. Net is nothing but network, the way of connecting different computers together. So the two topics, just to have an idea, it's nothing but servlets and the other one is JSP. So what are servlets? What is the purpose of that? What is architecture, or what is the life cycle of a servlet? So different type of servlets are there. One is generic servlet, another is HTTP servlet, and the third one is filter servlet. So in that we talk about generic servlet. So what is the purpose of session tracking? JSP introduction, how to write a JSP program. What is the flow of control happening in a JSP program? What is the flow of execution of a JSP program? What is the structure of a JSP program? How to write a JSP program? Then what is scripting and directive tags, Java, Bean class, and hands-on? Some example based on our time availability. So you can put up all your doubts. So servlets and JSP is what we are talking about. The first topic is about web. So web is nothing but different documents, HTML document or CSS, XML, JavaScript, cloud, www, World Wide Web, PHP. So the collection of all these programs, collection of all these files which can be distributed all over the world is what we call it as a web. The documents, collection of documents that can be shared among computers in the network. But I wish to talk about, rather than web, we talk about internet. So internet, two words. So international, net is nothing but network, the process of connecting multiple computers together. So web and HTTP, hypertext transfer protocol. Hypertext transfer protocol. So what is a protocol? Protocol is set of rules. So when you are driving your car in road, so there are some rules to be followed. So when the indicator to be used, when you have to apply brakes, when not to apply brakes, when not to horn, some rules are there while driving, which side you have to drive. So that's what we talk about protocol. The same way in internet, whenever you are communicating between different computers, so some set of rules that we are using, that's what protocol. Hypertext. So some text which is acting as the reference of some other resource. So in a web page, when you open Edureka web page, whenever you click on any of the codes, it will take you to that particular codes page. So that text is acting as the hypertext. So hypertext transfer protocol, the set of rules used for transferring data from one system to another, from one browser to the server, is what we talk about HTTP. The protocol is HTTP://. HTTP is a protocol. What is that protocol stands for? Hypertext Transfer Protocol, that clients and servers use on the web to communicate. So two terms are coming there. One is client and another is server. It is nothing but a web application. I'll talk about what is client and server. So for communication between client and server, we are using this concept of protocol, HTTP protocol. So what is basically a client? So client is our computer. See, for example, let me put in this way. I open a browser. I'm sending a request to google.com. So HTTPS or http://www.google.com. When I press enter, so I use the browser. So this computer is the client system. I'm sending a request to google.com. What is google.com? A server. So what is a server? Server is something It may be a machine, or it may be an application. It may be anything which is providing services to the client is what we call it as a server. A server is something which is providing services to the client is called as a server. Now this client is going to send a request to google.com. The request will come to google.com, and Google will process the request of the client, and they are giving the response back to the client. Google is processing the request and giving the response back to the client. So this is what we talk about a web application. So two entities are coming. One is the client and the other one is server. Server is providing services to the client, and client is accessing the services provided by the server. A client server architecture. So in order to make you understand, I can put it in this way. So for example, just imagine we have got a room, or in our office. So we have got 10 computers in the network. So connecting different computers together is what we call it as network. So we have 10 computers in the network and one printer we have. So 10 computers and one printer. So from each computer, we can give a request to take the printout of a document. So 10 computers can send a request to the printer to take the printout. So what is that printer? That printer is the server. So printer is a server which is providing what service? Print service. So that's what we talk about, a client server architecture. All the 10 computers are the clients and printer is the server. It is providing the services to the client. What service are they providing? What service that printer is providing? That printer is providing the print service. And what service client is getting? Printing the document they are getting. So that's what client server architecture. So in this browser, whenever you type a URL, this is called as URL, and when you press enter, this browser HTTP request object will be created. HTTP request and response. A web application is a request response application or a client server application. A web application is a request response application or a client server application. So whenever the client is sending a request to server, it will come to the server. Whenever a client is sending a request, HTTP protocol will create an HTTP request object. HTTP request is a packet of information that one computer sends to another computer to communicate something, to send the data, to send the username and password to Gmail. In a banking application, to send the username and password to the server. In a registration page, Gmail account creation, first name, last name, Gmail ID, password, confirm password, all that things will be sent to the server. So for that purpose, we use HTTP request. So the data and the request will come to the server. It will get processed in the server. If requires, it will connect to the database and it will give the response back. This is HTTP response. So HTTP response is the packet of information sent by server to the client in response to a request made by the client. Request and response. The combination of request and response is what we call it as a web transaction. The combination of a request and response is what we call it as a web transaction. So remember, whenever you open the browser and you send a request to google.com, the request HTTP request object will be created and the response. So for example, in order to understand this is my browser. I'll open a separate tab. I opened a separate tab. Right click on this browser, inspect element. Right click on the browser and you say inspect element. There we got network. There is an option called the network. How you got the screen? Right click, inspect element, or you press F12 function key. You press F12 function key. I got the network. No, nothing is happening. I'm going to send a request to google.com. So www.google.com. I told you, whenever you send a request, HTTP protocol will create an HTTP request object, and that request object will send the details of the client, details of this browser, the data, if any, you are passing. So I press enter. You can see in the network, we are getting some google.com and all the things. Do not for success. I just click on any of this URL, maybe the last one. I'll click on this. What is coming there? This example tells you response header, what response they are giving. These are all the response informations. So we are not going to talk about what is that. Just to understand, it is sending 434 bytes of response. They are sending it back. And the request header is this. So these are all the details they are sending to server. Request as well as response by using the post method. Request, get and post. Two methods basically. When you take this, they are also response header and also request header. So from this example, we can understand whenever the client is sending a request to server, HTTP protocol will create an HTTP request object with some information and the response is coming back. Now, what is the difference between? So basically get and post. Get method is used to submit only a limited amount of data, depends on the browser. Maybe 2 kilobytes to 8 kilobytes of data, limited amount of data can be sent. Whereas post method, more amount of data can be sent. In the get method, I'll show you practically. In the get method, data is sent as a query string. Along with the URL itself, the data will be sent. Along with the URL itself, the data will be sent. But in the case of post, the data is sent along with the HTTP request object. Along with HTTP request object, the data will be sent. So data is sent in the header, whereas here data is sent with the HTTP request object. Not secured, secured, cannot be bookmarked. What is that? We will see. So mainly you understand 2 points. These two, HTTP and get and post, are the two methods of HTTP protocol. It has got push, delete, different methods are also there, but mainly two methods, get and post. So get method is used for submitting only a limited amount of data, whereas post method is used for submitting more amount of data. Get method is used for submitting less amount of data, whereas post method is used for submitting more amount of data. In the case of get method, data is sent as a query string. The data is being sent as a query string. Query, Q-U-E-R-Y. So that means along with the URL, maybe something like this, http://www.google.com, question mark, name is equal to Edureka. So this is what we talk about, query string. Along with the URL, the data is being sent. Because of that, less amount of data can be submitted. Whereas if the method is post, you may not be able to see this data there. So get method as well as post method. Now, what are basically servlets? So when we talk about servlets, it is used for creating a web application. So what do you mean by web application? We've seen that web application can be called as a request response application, or we can call it as a client server application. Client server application. So in a client server application, we have got two entities are coming. One is client side. This is what the client is. We got the client, and also we got server. So we already seen server is something which is providing services to the client, and client, we got client. Client is used for sending a request to the server and also to get the response back. So normally in the client machine, it may be a mobile phone also. So there are some programs in the client machine. So that is mainly the browser. This we call it as client side applications. This we call it as client side applications. We'll call it as client side applications. So the programs or the application in the client machine useful. So what is server and client? Server is providing services. Client is accessing the services provided by the server. Server is providing services. Client is accessing the services provided by the server. So the best example is a web browser. So in this computer, we open the Firefox or any browser. Using that, the client can send the request. So what is the purpose of a browser? Browser is an application is a client-side application used for sending a request to the server and also to get the response back. So in a web application, client-side applications are used for sending a request to the server and also to get the response back. And the same way, the programs in the server machine used for receiving the request from client, process the request, and to give an appropriate response. By processing means by connecting to the database to process the request and to give an appropriate response back to the client is what we call it as server-side programs. The programs in the client machine used for sending a request to the server, that is what client-side program, and the programs in the server machine used for receiving the request from client, process the request, and to give an appropriate response back to the client is what we call it as server-side program. So this is request, HTTP request, and this is response. So for example, we are sending in a banking application, we are sending the username and the password. For logging in credentials, we are sending. So that data will come to the server-side program, the programs in the server machine. So this is what the server-side programs. The programs or the applications in the server machine used for receiving the request from client. So this is server-side applications. The programs in the server machine used for receiving the request from client, process the request by connecting to the database, and to give an appropriate response back to the client is what we call it as server-side programs. A three-tier architecture. So client side something is happening, server side something is happening, and also we got the database, the place where data is stored. That's what a three-tier architecture. Now, what are servlets? So one word definition I can tell you, servlets are the server-side applications that we develop using Java language. Once again, servlets are the server-side applications that we develop using Java language. We got not only servlets, we got PHP, we can go for ASP, we can go for ASP.NET. So like that, many server-side programming languages are there, technologies are there. So what are our point of discussion is servlets, including JSP. These are all server-side technologies used for developing server-side application, and that server-side applications are used for receiving the request from client, process the request, and to give an appropriate response back. And any server-side application if you develop, so I hope most of you are aware of Java. So you know how to write a Java program. You may know how to compile the Java program. You may know how to run the Java program. So one type of Java application is standalone application that will run only on this computer. And in any standalone Java program, the starting point of execution is main method. Any standalone Java program, the starting point of execution is public static void main. So when you give a Java class to the executor, it will access the main method. Now, but a server-side programs should be placed in a web server or it should be placed in a application server. We'll talk about what is the difference later. So the server-side program, servlets are server-side applications. The server-side applications to be placed in a web server or it should be placed in an application server. The server-side applications to be placed in a web server or it should be placed in an application server. All right, so the server-side programs to be placed in a web server or an application server, the differences and all we'll discuss later. Let's go through this presentation. Creates a web application. We've seen a request response application. It has got many interfaces and classes. Must be implemented to create servlet. Response to any incoming request deployed to create web pages, robust and scalable. So now what is a flow? So client opens the browser, send a request to the server. Server will understand what is the request of the client. The server will receive the data, if any, from in the request object, HTTP request object. If any data is there, server will receive that. They will process that by connecting to the database if required. Then after the processing, maybe a successful user or a authenticated user or not a authenticated user, based on that a response will be generated, and that response will be given back. A request response what is happening in all the browser related thing, all the web application. Client will send a request to the server. The server will receive the request, process the request, and give the response back to the client. This is what we talk about servlets. So CGI, we don't want to get into CGI at this time. So that is also server-side program. Now, what is the architecture of servlet? So web browser client, same. Sending a request using HTTP protocol, sending a request to server. The server, web server or application server, we place the servlet. The servlets are in the server that will get executed. If it requires, it will connect to the database, process the request, generate the response, and the HTTP protocol will give the response back to and fro from the browser, client's browser. A request is being fired that will come to the server. Server will receive the request, web server maybe. They will receive the request. They will receive the data from the client, process it. The servlet program will process it, because servlets are the server-side program. If it requires, it will connect to the database. They will store the data, retrieve the data, or all that operations will be performed. Now, when you see the life cycle of a servlet, so in a standalone Java program, the starting point of execution is, in a standalone Java program, the starting point of execution is public static void main. But in the case of a web application, it has got life cycle. So what is the life cycle of a servlet? So when you want to see the life cycle of a servlet, what is the life cycle of a servlet? Life cycle of a servlet. So remember, the life cycle, what is life cycle? From starting till death. That's what life cycle. The life cycle of a servlet is declared in Java x.servlet interface. This is an interface. Only method declarations are there. The life cycle of a servlet is declared in Java x.servlet, the last servlet, S capital letter, interface. So what are the different stages of this life cycle of a servlet? The first one, initialization. Initialization is nothing but public void init method. Argument is servlet config, throws servlet exception. This is what the initialization. And that will happen only once. A servlet will be instantiated only once. So instance creation, we know. The second one, servicing. Any terms we can use. So my point is, process the request of the client and to give the response back. Receive the request from client, process the request and give the response back. That is what servicing. The method that we are having is public void service. It has got servlet request. It's nothing but HTTP servlet request. I mean, servlet request is nothing but HTTP request. Servlet request and servlet response. Two arguments will come. Servlet response. And the third life cycle is destroying. So the servlet is being destroyed. So public void destroyed. This is what the life cycle of a servlet. So life cycle of a servlet is declared in. The life cycle of a servlet is declared in Java x.servlet interface. So the life cycle, we have got initialization, servicing, as well as destroying. So initialization is done with the public void init, servicing, public void service, and destroying public void destroy. Service method have got two arguments. One is servlet request. Remember, in any web application, client will send from the browser an HTTP request is being sent, and this servlet should give a response back. So servlet request and servlet response, and also public void destroy. Now, apart from these three methods, two more additional methods are there. Two more method declarations. Altogether, 5 methods declared in Java x.servlet.servlet interface. So in that, the 3 methods comes under the life cycle. A servlet will be instantiated once, and servlet process the request and sending the response back. I mean, destroying the servlet. This is the life cycle. So if I show you in a pictorial way, this is my server. And here I have got one servlet. I call it as my servlet. I've got one servlet, my servlet. It's a class file. Servlets are nothing but Java programs. So we have got my servlet.class. I've got my servlet.class. One client, one person, one client is sending a request to my servlet. So this client is sending a request to my servlet. When this client is sending a request to my servlet, what will happen is the servlet class will be loaded for the first time. The instance is not there. Load the servlet class. It will take that servlet class. Loads servlet class. So it will take that particular class. So every servlet is a .class file. That servlet will be loaded. To allot the memory, creates a new instance. It will create an object of that servlet. Then the next one. So now memory is sufficient. Calls init method. With the argument, it will call the init method. Then after that, it calls service method. So service method have got servlet request as well as the servlet response method called service method. This is what the life cycle of a servlet. So now once again I will tell you, I just written a Java program, I compiled it, so we got a servlet class, my servlet.class. So client is sending a request, it has got my servlet.class. This servlet class, when the first client is sending a request, that particular web server, I write it as web server. So we have got web server like Tomcat or something. So client is sending a request. This servlet class will be loaded. It will take that particular servlet class. Then it will create a new instance of the servlet. It will create a new object of that servlet. Then it will call the init method, first lifecycle method. Then it will call the service method. So by this time, when the instance is created, this is what the instance object. And from that object, response is coming back to client. So this is request and this is the response. Request as well as response. Now, when the second client is sending a request, so when the second client is sending a request, this is client 2. When the second client is sending a request, the instance is already available. So since the instance is already available, it will come directly to the instance. No need of doing these steps again. No need of calling the init method. So it will come directly to the service method and the response will come back to the client. So init method will get executed only once. A servlet will be instantiated only once, but the service method get executed for each client's request. Whenever a client is sending a request, it is sure that the service method gets executed. So this is what the life cycle of a servlet. From this example, what we can understand, what is that you need to understand? A servlet will get instantiated only once. A servlet will get instantiated only once. So same way, init and destroy method only once, And service method, whenever the client is sending a request, it will do the service method. It will process the request in the service method. It has got two arguments. Servlet request, it is equivalent to HTTP request. Remember the first point. So whenever the client is sending a request to server, whenever the client is sending a request, the HTTP protocol is creating an HTTP request object that contains the details of the client and HTTP response object. So that HTTP protocol request object and response object is nothing but servlet request and servlet response. This is what the life cycle of a servlet. Now the question is, how can you create your own servlet? If I want to create my own servlet, so what is that you do is you create a public class my servlet implements Java x.servlet.servlet interface. How can you create your own servlet? How can you create your own servlet, or how can I create my own servlet? If I want to create my own servlet, create a public class that implements Java x.servlet.servlet. Create a public class that implements Java x.servlet.servlet. And how many methods? Implements keyword is used for interfaces. So I'll create a class, a public class, my servlet, implements Java x.servlet.servlet interface. So this is how we create our own servlet. So I'm creating a servlet. So I created a servlet. So the question is, how can we create our own servlet? So you create a servlet, a public class that is implemented from Java x.servlet.servlet interface. Java x.servlet.servlet interface. And you define how many methods are there in servlet? 5 methods. 1, 2, 3 are lifecycle methods plus 2 methods. Define 5 methods. That's how you can create your own servlet. But it's already done. So how many types of servlets are there? So one is called as generic servlet. The second one is called as HTTP servlet. And the third one is called as filter servlet. So we got generic servlet, we got HTTP servlet, and also we got filter servlet. Generic servlet, HTTP servlet, as well as filter servlets. So these are the 3 types of servlets that we are having. So generic servlet, HTTP servlet, as well as filter servlet. So in that one servlet we are going to discuss is about generic servlet. So what are basically generic servlets? So the generic servlet is a public class. It's an abstract class. Public abstract class. Generic servlet implements Java x.servlet.servlet. So generic servlet is one type of servlet. Public class, abstract class, generic servlet, same way HTTP servlet and filter servlet. But what we want is, we want to create our own generic servlet. How can we create our own generic servlet? By creating a public class that extends generic servlet. So let's create. So we discuss something theoretically. In order to understand this, let me write a new Java program. In my edit plus, I'm going to write a Java program. So what I do is I'll say import java.io. So throws also will come here. So it is service method, and also it has got destroy method also. So now import java.io.star, import java x.servlet.star. So import java x.servlet.star. I create public class lifecycle servlet extends generic servlet. So we want to see practically. So I told you init method get executed, service method get executed, destroy method whenever the application is being closed. So we need to understand this practically. So init method once, service method whenever the client is sending a request. For that purpose, I'm just overriding the lifecycle method, public void init, servlet config, servlet config, configuration, throws servlet exception. So we are creating a child class of generic servlet. So public class lifecycle servlet extends generic servlet, public void init. The argument is servlet config, throws servlet exception. So this is inheritance concept is working there. So this lifecycle servlet superclass is generic servlet. So I want to call the init method of generic servlet. So config. So I want to call the init method of generic servlet. So super is a keyword of Java acting as a reference of superclass. Super.init of config. Yes, generic servlet is extended from java.lang.object and it implements servlet interface. They have already defined all the methods except service method. That's what I have written here. Public abstract class generic servlet implements, extends java.lang.object and implemented from java x.servlet.servlet. Then just to know for our understanding, so system.out.println, I just give a message in init method. I just mentioned in init method. When we get this message, we can understand that init method is executed. The same way, second method is public void service. It has got servlet request, servlet request, servlet response, throws servlet exception, as well as IO exception, servlet exception, and IO exception. Nothing we are doing. We are just writing only one thing: system.out.println in service method. We just mentioned only this one in service method. So public void service method. So we have got public void service method. It has got servlet request, servlet response, throws servlet exception, and IO exception. And the next one is public void destroy method. Public void destroy method, system.out.println in destroy method. I just written this method. So this is what our own generic servlet. So how can we create our own generic servlet? Create a public class, which is a child class of generic servlet. Create a public class, a child class of generic servlet. It has got init method, it has got service method, and it has got destroy method. These are the three methods that we have. It has got init method, service method, and destroy method. We already discussed about the life cycle. So which methods are being executed, when the init method will work, when the service method will work, and when the destroy method will work, we already discussed. So we just written our servlet. So I just written my servlet. After writing this particular servlet, let me save and all. But if you want to run this servlet, what is required? A web server is required. So we just written the life cycle. So we are discussing only about generic servlet. How can you create our own servlet? Create a public class that is extended from generic servlet. We define the init method, service method, and also destroy method. This is what the three life cycle methods that we have. Now, what is that we require? We need to have a web server. This is not a standalone Java program. So in a standalone Java program, the starting point of execution is public static void main. Public static void main, but in this program, we don't have public static void main. So what is required now? We need to have a web server, and I'm using a web server Tomcat. You might have heard about Tomcat as a web server. So we have got the Tomcat server. So this Tomcat server is a servlet container. So we need to have that. So what I do is we are going to install our web server. So let me come to Google. When we come to google.com, I'm looking for Tomcat. I'm looking for Tomcat. So I just search Tomcat. What is that Tomcat? Apache Tomcat is an open source implementation of the Java Servlet, Java Server Pages, JSP, etc. So Apache Tomcat is an open source implementation. So let me come to Apache Tomcat. I just download Tomcat 9. So we are going to download Tomcat 9. You search for Tomcat 9, so down one. 32-bit or 64-bit Windows Service Installer. This is what the installer we are downloading. Because we talk about servlets. We are talking about servlets. We know that it is server-side programs can be developed. So if you want to get that, so 32-bit or 64-bit Windows Service Installer to be downloaded, we need to have a server. So that I already downloaded and it is available with me. This is what the Tomcat server. So I'll just double click. So there is something called port number. So what do you mean by port number? So for example, our mouse is connected to mouse port. Keyboard is connected to keyboard port. To identify the application, we use port number. So to identify the application, we use something called the port. Yeah, 8080. So port to identify. So in this computer, so many applications are installed. How to identify each application? For that purpose, a number is given. That's what we talk about port. So I'll just install next, agree, next. So server shutdown port, the port number should not be a negative number. By default, they're given it as negative number. You change it into 1. And HTTP 1.1 connector port is 8080, a number representation. But in this computer, already I know that 8080 port is already available. I'm giving another port 65535. You can provide any port number which is not already running. 8080, it's already, I know that it's running. So I just given the port number as 65535. So in our computer, we are going to install Tomcat server. And I provide the username as admin and the password also admin. We provide the username as admin and the password also admin. Just like that, you can provide any username and password. So we'll click on next. Java is already there in the system. So Tomcat is running on top of JDK. So Java is already available and I'll click on next. So where to install? So some lengthy path is coming, but I just want to install this in C drive. In C drive, Tomcat 9.0, wherever you want, you can install that. I just click on install. So we are just installing Tomcat in our C drive. So it will create a new folder with the name of Tomcat. Let's see. Don't start this. Click on finish. You can see Tomcat is installed just now. Tomcat is just installed just now. Yeah, XAMPP also have got a Tomcat server, Raviraj Singh. XAMPP also have got a built-in Tomcat server, but we installed separately. You can use that also, not a problem. But I want to show you how to install Tomcat. That is the reason why I did this. Now, what is the port number we have given? 65535 is the port number. Now, inside this Tomcat, I want to develop our own application. So in Tomcat, we want to develop our own application. So for that purpose, let's open Tomcat. All your web applications to be placed inside web apps folder. You need to place your web applications in the web apps folder. So how many applications are there? By default, 3 applications are there. Inside the web apps, 3 applications. Now, let us start our Tomcat. So to start the Tomcat, from the command prompt I'm doing. So different ways you can do. I just opened the command prompt, and from the command prompt, I want to start the Tomcat server. From the command prompt, cd/cd tomcat/bin. From the bin directory, startup. So from the bin directory, I will say startup. I'll press enter. This is what the Tomcat server is running. It is working. Tomcat server started. So this Tomcat server is running on our computer, this computer itself. So what I do is, now the client and the server is same. So each computer in the network is identified with the text address and IP address. Each computer is identified with the text address and IP address. So what I do is, right click on this computer. What is the text address of this? Properties. What is that? Sunil is the name of this computer. Text address is Sunil. And what is the IP address of this computer? You use a command called ipconfig. You use a command called the ipconfig. I press enter. What is the IP address? IP address is 192.168.1.6 is the IP address. Ethernet adapter 192.168. So this computer is identified with the text address of Sunil and IP address 192.168.1.6. So what we do is, let us open the browser. Let me open the browser. I use the protocol HTTP. We use the server name, host name, Sunil. The port number 65535. We are sending a request. This is what we call it as URL, Uniform Resource Locator. So we are sending a request to Sunil 65535. Press enter. I'm getting the response back. So we are sending a response back, Sunil 65535. Or you can send. So I got the response back, same like Google and all. The same way, I open the browser, send a request to http:// what is the IP address? 192.168.1.6:65535. I'm getting the response back. So when any other devices are accessing this computer, they should use any of these things. If anybody else is accessing this computer, they should use either the text address or they should use IP address of this machine. If I myself is accessing, I can use the term localhost. When you call me with my name, Sunil. When I call myself, I use it as me or I. The same way, HTTP :// localhost 65535. So HTTP :// localhost 65535. I'm getting the response back. This is what is happening when you send a request to google.com or when you send a request to edureka.com, edureka.co. When you send a request to edureka.co, what is that we are getting? REK. When you send a request to edureka.co, we are getting the response back from Edureka. So we send a request to server and we got the response back. Now I want to know what are the applications which we have. So the applications, I'll come to manager app. What is the username and password? You have given admin, and the password is also admin. That's what we have given. So which are the applications? Inside Tomcat web apps, we got manager, docs and root. So / is root, documents, docs and manager. Now I want to create our own application. We want to create our own application with the name of Edureka, and inside that this servlet to be placed. So for that, if you want to know, please listen, because directory structure you should very clear about that. So what I do is, I want to create an application, new folder. So each directory is an application, new folder. In that place, I'll just give the name as Edureka. I'm giving the name as Edureka. This is one new application. Let me open this, refresh it. Have you seen there is Edureka is coming? So each directory in web apps is a web application. Each directory in web application, web apps is a application. Edureka is an application. And the directory structure you should remember. Inside Edureka, all HTML, CSS, JavaScript, everything will come here. I'll create a new folder. That new folder, I'll create it as web-inf. So we got web-inf in capital letter. So inside web-inf in capital letter, we have got two directories, library, lib, and also we have got new folder classes. So library as well as we got classes. Library as well as classes we got. All the, forget about library and all, classes. Inside this classes, we place this servlet program. Let me save this. Where? Inside C drive Tomcat, web apps, Edureka, web-inf, classes. What is the name of the program? Lifecycle servlet.java. Lifecycle servlet.java. I save this servlet, lifecycle servlet.java. Yeah, web-inf is a web information. Web-inf as it is, you have to create web information. Yes, that convention you should follow. If you're not giving in that way, your web application will not be loaded. Web informations. And the directory structure should be as it is, classes should be in small letter, library also in small letter. So we just save this program. So inside this servlet program, we are using Java x.servlet. That package contains generic servlet, servlet config, servlet exception, super.init, servlet request, servlet response, servlet exception. Everything is available in this package. So let me compile this program. Why web-inf? That's what the directory structure given by the Tomcat. So Tomcat will check for all the web information. Edureka is a web application. They will check for all the web informations from web-inf only. So there is no artificial intelligence is applied there. So they will not understand that this is the servlet program. You should follow the same directory pattern. Then only it will work. Shalini. Now let me come to the program. CD/, okay, CD web apps, Edureka, web-inf classes. So let me compile that servlet. How to compile this program? By using Java C lifecycle servlet.java. So we said Java C, Java compiler, all errors are happening. What are the errors? It do not know what is generic servlet, do not know what is servlet config, do not know servlet exception, then servlet request, servlet response, it do not know because the package it do not know. Now the servlet APIs are present in Tomcat, library, servlet-api.jar. So it is available in servlet-api.jar. So what I do is, I'll say set class path is equal to. So set class path is equal to C:/Tomcat 9.0/lib/servlet-api.jar semicolon. So set class path is equal to C:/Tomcat 9.0/lib/servlet-api.jar semicolon. We set the class path and I am compiling the program. Now the program is compiled. Or along with the Java compiler also we can provide that. So we compile the program. Now set class path and all we cannot discuss at this time, Raghu. We are setting the not path, we are setting the class path. So we set the class path for servlet-API so that it will take the classes from servlet-API.jar. So set class path is equal to C tomcat9 lib servlet-API.jar Java C lifecycle servlet compile. Now we need to tell the web server. That there is a servlet class, lifecycle servlet.class, that should be accessed whenever the client is sending a request to live. I want to do the configuration like this. Client will send a request to live. That time, lifecycle servlet to be executed. So what is the meaning of that? Whenever the client is sending a request to live, that time lifecycle servlet to be executed. Whenever the client is sending a request to live, that time lifecycle servlet to be executed. So how can you tell that? For that purpose, we use something called the web.xml. So we see in the lifecycle, init, service, destroy, all that. Steps to create the servlet, create and compile simple servlet code, add mappings to web.xml. This is called as web deployment descriptor file. This is actually an old way of implementing the code. This is based on Servlet 2.5. In the new version, there is no need of having web.xml and all. Directly through annotation we can do. Remember, we can do it through annotations also. So start Apache Tomcat, start web browser and request client. Generic servlet we discussed. Service method to be defined and all. So to generic servlet, you must need to extend Java extrude servlet.servlet and override the service method. Easier to write. Servlet request, servlet response are the two arguments. Servlet request, object of servlet request is used to provide the, see, actually the HTTP protocol is sending an HTTP request object that is stored in HTTP servlet request, and the same way servlet response also. So many classes are there. So servlet config, servlet context, servlet request, response, generic servlet, a servlet input stream, output stream, unavailable exception, HTTP servlet, so many classes. Filter also. Now what I do is, let me write web deployment descriptor, new, an XML file. I'll save this as web.xml inside Tomcat. The directory structure you should follow. Edureka, web-inf. Inside this, you should save it as web.xml. So inside web-inf, you should write web.xml. We write web-app / web-app. See, when you see this, all applications have got a display name except our application. Edureka not there. So I will say display -name webinar at Edureka / display -name. So display -name webinar at Edureka display name. Wait for some time, refresh. So application is not loaded, so some issues. What is that? This is what the error. What is the error? Some error is happened. SAX parser, some ID, premature end of file, web.xml. Web.xml, line number 1, column number 1, premature end of file. What is the problem with the XML? So web-app display name. So now the application is not loaded, you see. Edureka, is it running? No. Why is it not running? Let me refresh it. Now it is running. What is the problem? No issues at all. Now have you seen webinar at Edureka? No issues, maybe loading time or something. I have not made any changes. So now you can see Edureka webinar display name, web.xml. Display name is coming. All right, display name is coming. Then after that, we want to say that our servlet. So servlet /servlet. We provide servlet -name lifecycle, something like a variable name, lifecycle /servlet -name, and we provide the servlet hyphen class life cycle servlet. This is what the servlet class, so servlet hyphen class. So we are telling the web server that web server, there is one servlet. That servlet class is lifecycle servlet. The servlet class is lifecycle servlet. So we got servlet. Servlet name is lifecycle. Servlet class is lifecycle servlet. Servlet class is lifecycle servlet. Now, when this servlet to be accessed, so for that purpose, we'll say servlet hyphen mapping slash servlet hyphen mapping. So servlet name, the same servlet to be accessed whenever a client is sending something like URL hyphen pattern slash life URL hyphen pattern. So the meaning of this one is whenever a client is sending a request to live from the browser, whenever a client is sending a request to live, that time this lifecycle servlet to be accessed. That's what the meaning of that. So whenever a client's request is coming for live, whenever a client's request URL hyphen pattern. So whenever a client's request is coming for live, the web server should access lifecycle servlet. Let me save this and wait for the reloading of application. 9:15, I think it's reloaded. Yeah, now it's reloaded. Now we can check the life cycle. So this is a server. Okay, I'll reduce the size of this. I'm sending a request to, no response will come there. http:// localhost 65535/ what is the context name? Context means application name. Application is Edureka. Context name is Edureka. And what is the servlet name? Life. L-I-F-E. So Edureka / life. So application name is Edureka. Servlet is life. Actually, servlet class is lifecycle servlet. I'll just press enter. I'm not getting any response back, but what is happening here? You see in the server, in init method and in service method. This is what we discussed. So init method get executed and also service method get executed. This is the first client which is requesting. I can open some other browser. Maybe I'll use Edge browser, Microsoft Edge. This is something like a second client. When another client is sending a request, this is one another client, second client. When the second client is sending a request, when I press enter, what happens? It is accessing only the service method. Is it calling the init method? No. When I refresh, 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 this also I'm refreshing every time service method. Now what I do is I'm going to stop this application. So when you stop this application, I'm just going to stop. When I stop this application, what happens? In destroy method, the servlet is destroyed. Now the web application is not running at all. When you refresh, HTTP 404, you start the application, then you refresh this. Now again, what happens? Init method is working and service method. So refresh, a servlet will get instantiated only once. And if you want to stop the server, shut down. So startup and shut down. I'll type shutdown. Where is that? CD bin shutdown. And shut down, the Tomcat server is being stopped. And now if you refresh, you will not get anything recent. It will not work because Tomcat server is not working at all. So what we discussed is, we discussed about the life cycle of a servlet. What is basically server-side program? What is the need of doing a server-side program? That's what the points we discussed about. So we can do an application in our Tomcat server also. See, for example, let me show you one example in Tomcat. So window, preferences. So first you need to integrate the Tomcat server. So for that purpose, you come to first you integrate Tomcat server preferences. Server, we integrate runtime environment, add runtime environment, and we integrate Apache Tomcat version 9.0. So where is that we install? We install this in C drive, and you just provide the root directory. Click on finish. So we are integrating the Tomcat server, apply and close. So we integrated Tomcat server. We are going to create a dynamic web project, and the dynamic web project which I am going to create is same Edureka. Edureka as the application, Tomcat version 4.0. Now this is what the Tomcat server, one application we are creating. So in the latest version, web.xml is not a must. If you want, you include. If you don't want, don't include that. So click on finish. I can create an HTTP servlet also, but I'll just create only generic servlet, or I'll show you without much explanation. I want to create a page to give an image back to the client. I want to write a page to give an image back to the client. So what I do is web content. We got web.inf, library, all that. In web content, I'll keep a new folder of images. I keep a new folder of images. I kept one image for image. Edureka 2.jpg is one image. Edureka 2.jpg paste. I just want to show you an application that's giving. No, Rashid, let me complete this, please. So CO Java resources, I'll write a new package. co.edureka as a package. co.edureka as a package. So inside this, I'm writing a servlet, new servlet. So there is something called HTTP servlet and all. It has got some. Generic servlet is a basic one. HTTP servlet have got some added functionalities compared to generic servlet. So many new features are integrated. I'll say welcome servlet. Welcome servlet. It's a HTTP servlet. I can make it as generic servlet also. Let it be HTTP servlet, and it should be accessed with the welcome/welcome. So it's done through annotation, not web.xml. I just want to give this image back, or I want to create a page. So we have got welcome, annotation. Edureka is the application, port number and all. And I just want to give a response back to the client. So I'll just say print writer out is equal to response.getWriter. So I need to have a writer object. This page is going to give a HTML response back. So response.set content type text/HTML. Text/HTML. I can include that HTML from a separate page also. I can include that HTML from a separate page also. For that purpose, new file welcome.html. So I've got welcome.html as a page. HTML head title. We provide the title as Edureka. Then we got the body H1 Edureka Limited. So something we are writing. Below that we have got img src is equal to images slash Edureka 2.jpg, something like that. img src is equal to, where is that? Images Edureka 2.jpg, some image, some simple page, and I have got a horizontal ruler. So some paragraphs, some contents, and also this is what the HTML. So that HTML I can use some styles also. So style. So inside this style we can write that, and this HTML code to be integrated here. Or you can write copy and paste here the same HTML, but I use something like request dispatcher. RD is equal to request dot request dispatcher, get request dispatcher of welcome.html, I'm just including welcome.html file, rd.include. What is written there? We are including the request as well as the response. So that HTML code will be integrated and they will send it back to the client. So some style and also body. So inside the body, we'll provide some background, linear gradient, CSS properties, linear gradient to right. So what color I'll provide? Some colors. What is that? Orange, white, not exact color, some color, something like a national flag. To right, so 3 colors are given. So text hyphen align center. So for the images and all, img border radius of 20 pixel, box hyphen shadow. So some CSS, okay, don't think about this one, 0, 0, 10 pixel and black color. So something, I don't know what I have done. I just integrated something. And this servlet is giving an HTML response back. So let's run this, run on server. So Tomcat server, finish. Run on server, and we are finishing that. So let's see what happens now. See, I'll just copy this URL and I'm just trying to access it from the browser. So same URL and I'm getting a response back. So something Edureka limited, so some image, box shadow, so some colors also, multiple colors also we applied. So this is what one servlet we got. So servlets are server-side applications that we develop using Java language, and we got a response back. I can give JSON response. So many things we can do. This is, please consider that this is only some basic idea, to give a basic idea about what is web application or how to work with the web application. This is what is happening. When you send a request to google.com, what is that we are getting? Some page, a professional page, not much colors and all, white color page we are getting. So something similar to that only we got here. So HR is not required. So whatever you want, you can integrate login and all, we are able to integrate. So thank you very much. Take care of yourself. Thank you.